This is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
It is that time of the week again, and it's wonderful to have you with us for another edition of This is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. And what a life we have to celebrate today. He was a man who came over from Western Australia and made an immediate impact in the big time. He was flamboyant, he was watchable, he was the Buzz. Peter Bousustow. Buzz.
G'day,
Welcome.
Pete. How are you going? And what a walk down Vintage Lane for you and I, eh? Back at the old greyhound days, we used to get to the greyhounds and I used to call... no, you used to call, that's right.
I want to talk to you about a particular night at the greyhounds a little bit later in the program, but it has been a long time since we've seen each other.
Yes.
How are you?
Very well. Yeah, battling on like everyone else is in the old Australia at the moment. But been over in Melbourne for a couple of weeks now and done a lot of charities and fundraisers and that sort of thing around the place, and been very, very, very good and well received, and going around with that scallywag, Pete, called Mark Jacko Jackson.
Now, I reckon if anyone could probably get a word in with Jacko, you might be the one, but even you might struggle at times.
Oh, I tell you what, we're even money there, both of us, each of two, Pete.
What's it like to get around to all of the provincial areas and various areas around Melbourne and indeed all around Australia and connect with the fans from yesteryear? Yeah,
look, I think that's a very good point, and it's sad to see what's going on. We go to a lot of country areas, Pete, as you can imagine, and a lot of sides have come down from, say, 3 sides to 2 sides to 1 side, because that's probably just the way it's going at the moment. There's that little thing called internet and websites and all that sort of thing, which sort of affects the kids as well. But I get a little bit disappointed when I go around, because great clubs and great community areas are suffering. And in Western Australia, so much too, because our market real estate over there is very, very, very on a flat spell at the moment. And of course, that affects virtually everything, because people go away and don't want to do it. But I did a show a couple of years ago with the great man, Alex Jezelenko, and we went to a little club in East Fremantle Zone, which was just out of Fremantle, and they had 27 sides, Pete, 4 under 8s, 4 under 9s, 4 under 10s, and of course so on. And Jezza said, "This is wonderful. You know, your football here is in great, great, great shape." And 2 years' time, we went back there, Pete. Jezza asked the same question again. 8 sides.
Wow.
So they'd lost nearly 19 sides in that time because of basketball and internet, et cetera, and it's a really great shame. And you asked the question regarding, what do you think about it? But, we go in there now, and you can't go in there and charge clubs big dollars now. You've got to help them. You've got to go in there at a reasonable price, make sure they can make some money, leave the place, Pete, with a smile on their face, get a signature off you, get a photo with you. And, that's humbling to the heart, isn't it, Pete, because you give something back.
How do you reckon your Blue Boys are going at the moment, Buzz?
Yeah, pretty ordinary. I think, this is my opinion, I think we made a mistake, drafting a lot of the young fellas. I would have maybe just drafted a couple of them on and got some middle-aged players, Pete. There was a couple of middle-aged players about 30 years ago that come to Carlton. One was called Kenny Hunter.
Oh, I remember
the other one
him.
was called Peter Bousustow. You remember those two, Pete? Well, that's what I'm talking about. Mature bodies. Hunter was a great player, Pete. Absolutely unbelievable. He had 3 broken jaws by the time he come to Western Australia. 3-time All-Australian. Absolutely a fantastic player to play with. But not the big body, but the mature body. And I think that's what Carlton are missing at the moment. Leaving 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 teenagers playing in a game of football, Pete, and of course they're just going to get bumped off the ball. We go back about 4 or 5 years to the GWS. They did exactly the same when they were just trying to get themselves into the right shape.
Although I must say, despite the fact that there's been another spoon this year for the Blues, there's one bloke who reminds me a little bit of you, the way he plays, and that's Charlie Curnow. His ability to leap tall buildings in a single bound, and he's got so much upside to him. He's going to be the future of the football club, and there is a little bit of you in him, Buzz, I reckon.
There was a story going around when Gibbs left, Ross Gibbs, the number 4, of course, that very famous number, Pete.
Yes.
And I got word, and I think it was from the great man that wears the number 4, used to wear the number 4, a bloke called Steve Kernahan.
I remember him too.
He rang me and said, "Buzz, there's a little bit of a whisper going around that Charlie Curnow wants to wear number 4. And I said, Absolutely. Please tell him I'll be absolutely delighted if he won. I don't know whether it was a chance of doing it, Pete, but I would have loved him to wear the number 4 because I can see some really outstanding talent in him. If he was in a sort of a slightly better side, I think he'd play even better football. We were talking about it off air, weren't we? Our forward line structure at Carlton at the moment is probably non-existent. If we get that going in the next year or two, and Charlie's still there, and of course we'll get Doherty back next year, which will be a very, very big plus for the side. Those young kids have got to get into the gym, don't they, Pete? And muscle up and strengthen up and, get some conditioning about them. But, look, I can see some talent there. Very, very important, though, this draft, Pete, the trade, and, of course, what they can manoeuvre in this next, 6 or 8, 10 weeks after the season, of course, because that's very, very important to Carlton, for the future.
You didn't play that many games for Carlton, but you are identified as a Carlton person. You were like a comet. You blazed across the sky in the big time and then went back to WA, and we'll talk about that as the hour progresses. But you are so identified. We sometimes get this impression of you that you played a couple of hundred games for Carlton, but it wasn't the case.
I played 65. Yeah. David Parkin was probably honoured, Pete, because he saw all my 65 games, so
Lucky
it was a pleasure for him. Yeah, that's right. And no, look, it was. I look back on it now and I sort of regret it that I never went on, and I think I could have taken my game to another level. People out there are probably thinking, hang on, jeepers, how much better, could you have got? But, I think I could have gone to another level. I played 65 games, 2 premierships and a night premiership, played with such a great side, and, there was champions and superstars on every line, Pete. I mentioned the half-back line to you, and there's a great story about that. And, Dool, Perevic and Hunter, sensational. Tingling still goes up my spine when I say them. And can I tell you the story about when David Parkin took over? Of course, Percy Jones had us in 1980. They should have won the premiership that year, they tell me, and they got beaten in straight sets. And David Parkin took over. And late November, he rang Kenny Hunter. Kenny was signed with the club. And David Parkin here, Ken, I believe you want to come over, but I want you to come over early and get used to the tradition and history and the culture of this great club, and get used to the players. And Kenny said, "Look, Coach, I'll be over, within the week." And he said, "I want to try you on a half back line: Bousustow, Val Perevic, and yourself." And as I said, Pete, the shivers still go up my spine when I mentioned that particular name. And Kenny said, "Fantastic, Coach. I'll get it all organised." He rang me the next day and he said, "Peter, David Parkin here, I've just taken over as the coach, I believe you want to come over, but I want you to come over early and get used to the tradition and history, etc., which I just said about Kenny, and I want to put you on, I want to try on a half-forward line, Wayne the Dominator Johnson, Mark McClure, and yourself." And again, Pete, they were the people that I was really revered to and idolised, when I was playing in Western Australia, and of course that eventually come off. And I might as well keep going on that story, Pete, because there's there's another real good story that follows on with it. And I said to him, "Look, I won't come over till late, David, because my father's got leukemia, and I've got a sports shop, and I'll come, late February if it's all right with you." Anyway, he said yes. Come over for the last 3 or 4 practice matches, and no one told me that Carlton just really didn't want to play in practice matches. The best 3 players on the ground was Mike Fitzpatrick, Kenny Hunter, and myself. Anyway, that went on. We played Hawthorn in the last one, played a blinder, kicked 6. Carlton were all over me. But we're going to clear now, blah, blah, blah. By the way, Lou Richards wants to speak to you on the Tuesday night before training. And this was just before the number 4 come in. They offered me number 25, Pete. I said, "You've got to be joking. That's that great man there."
Can't take Jess's number.
I'm battling to get myself going, let alone wear the great man's jumper. They offered me number 28, which was Percy Jones, another legend in the club, and then number 4 was available. Now, Pete and listeners, I didn't know this till about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. My father actually wore number 4 for Carlton.
Okay.
And it was I don't even know why he didn't tell me that, when he was at Carlton. He played about 22 or 23 games at Carlton, Pete. And
so it was a pure coincidence that you finished up in 4.
Exactly. It was a pure coincidental that it done. Anyway, it was very, very, very funny. He got me over at Blue, and I knew who he was, and, I'd read a lot and I knew a lot about him. He came over and he said, "Peter, I've heard you can jump as high as this grandstand. I said, you can kick free goals and you can tackle like a machine and you're just an all a bloody good player. And I said, Lou, I can jump as high as this building. I can tackle like an absolute Trojan. I can take freak marks day in and day out. Pete, he put it in the paper the next day.
Oh, no. How did that go down with your teammates?
That went wonderfully well with the teammates, Pete, I can tell you. So I thought to myself, geez, I'm in trouble here, so I've got to perform here or else, you know.
Well, I reckon you did perform, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But we think of you as a West Australian, and you're a proud West Australian, but you weren't born in WA, were you?
Correct. Now, Pete, another one that I regret is I never wore the big V. I would have loved to wear the big V. I was born in Western Victoria, as you just mentioned. My mother was an Ellison, who is Tom Ellison's sister. Brett Ellison, of course, is Uncle Tom's son and played 220 with North Melbourne.
Speaking of blokes who can take a mark,
yes.
Remember that mark that Brett Ellison took?
Oh, you know, it probably just
not
pales
bad.
into not bad. Well,
yeah.
You know, I've got one here.
In comparison,
I can't show
I'm
the
just
listeners.
looking at a poster at the moment of Buzz taking a mark, one of the marks that he took. How high are you there, Buzz, do you reckon?
Oh, look, geez, that's the grandstand
8 feet
there.
off the ground.
Yeah, there's big Jimmy Jess there and Mark McClure. Ashley's got straining the neck because he's looking up there, Pete. So, you know, but that was just a little mark. But no, Brett was a fantastic mark as well. And Brett, he played 220-odd games for North Melbourne. I think my uncle's a life member of the club, and so is Brett. And I could have signed with North Melbourne. And, of course, the story goes, Pete, that Ron Joseph actually did sign me on a Form 4, which is if I had to come to Melbourne in the next couple of years when I was playing in Perth, I would have had to go to North Melbourne. 2 years later, it lapsed. Carlton come over, saw me play a game that I kicked, 6 or 7 goals in, and said, "Look, you're right for us." So it was a perfect match, and it wasn't a fluke, Pete. It wasn't a fluke that I did pick Carlton because they'd won a premiership in '79. And they only had about 4 or 5 changes, of course, in that time. And I think Greg Wells come across from Melbourne, Kenny Hunter come in, myself come in, and I think Phil Malin come in. So there was 4 pretty good players that come into that side in the early '81. And of course, we virtually took all before us in the early of the '81 season.
Take us back to your childhood, Buzz. Where did it all begin? As far as WA, after you were born in Victoria, moved to WA. What were your early footy memories, and who were your early footy heroes?
Right. I come across from Melbourne when I was 4. My father coached Euroa to a premiership in '59 and stayed another couple of years, and we went back to Western Australia. And I never picked up a footy, Pete, till around about 10 or 11 years of age. There was no Oz kick and there was no free ball and that sort of thing in football then. And just went through the grades. Didn't excite anyone. Didn't the potential wasn't there at the time. And I think I missed a year in the under 15s and had that year off. Then under 16, 17, I started to sort of come alive, I suppose.
So why was that? Did you knuckle down a bit more, or was it just a natural evolvement and your talent was coming to the fore?
I had a health problem called asthma. And had it very badly. Nearly died a couple of times because of the breathing, as you probably know. And blisters and know what I mean there. And of course, they've got a lot of great drugs, of course, that stem the breathing now. And I nearly sort of passed out a lot of times there. So I couldn't train, the way that I wanted. But once I got stronger, Pete, and started to do a little bit more running and sort of weights, I started to get, the breathing was better, et cetera, et cetera. So the potential come. At school, I was a high jump champion. And I was breaking records in high jumps, and I think that's where the leap come from. That I had such a good leap, and at that stage, Pete, I was only about probably 11 stone. Now I'm about 12. So
maybe 12 and a half.
But I said to David, they wanted me to put on virtually a stone before I come over, and I said to David, I don't want to lose to the leap because that's one of my main strings to the bow. So, but he, again, I can't talk highly enough of David Park, and he just knew how to exactly handle me and, set the thing in motion, and the rest is history. And just come through the grades, Pete. Probably the under 16s, I won a medal in the grand final, best on ground in the grand final, which I think helps you because you know how to play in those big games. And then the under 18s, we got beaten in the grand final, and I played pretty well again. Then virtually went from there straight into Colts Reserves and League with Perth, who was my side in WA, then my junior council side. And, just sort of blossomed from there. 17 years of age, I played about 18 games, 19, 20 games, 20 games and 20, 21 games. And that started to, get that sort of continuity going, and that's when the VFL clubs at that stage started to notice me, and I think they're playing in a good side too, because Perth won premierships in that time as well. So playing in a good side really did help me progress.
We might take a break, Buzz, and then we'll talk about the transition from the waffle over to the big time and the fact that you made such an instant impression. And I reckon we might even talk about that goal and that mark at some stage of the program as well. Peter Bousustow is my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. We'll have more with Buzz after the break.
This is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
And what a pleasure it is to have the great Peter Bousustow as my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Buzz, we spoke about your time in the WAFL, the Waffle, and then the transition came. You walk into Carlton, it was one of the powerhouse teams of the competition at that stage.
Absolutely. And, again, as I said before, it was no fluke that I did pick them because... they had already won a premiership in '79, and they virtually had the same side, and only to be strengthened by Hunter. What a play to have! What a play to have! And of course, across that half back line, Perovic was a very, very rated player as well. He was an outstanding player, and of course, Bousustow. What do you say about Bousustow? Just words can't describe, and probably still is the epitome of half back flankers. Bruce wouldn't get 37, 38 possessions now. I can tell you, Pete. He would probably have that in a season, but he might have 370 spoils and smothers, etc., which David Parkin loved, and of course Carlton loved as well, Pete, because that was Bruce's job, and we just knew. I think, Pete, just butting in, I think we had that camaraderie. We had that bonding, and we had that sort of absolute belief in each other, and they won 3 out of 4. Very close to 83. We were in the top 4 then. 84, I could have come back, and we could have virtually won 5 out of 6. We went perilously close to it, because that's the sort of the great side that they were, and led beautifully and led unbelievably by the skipper, Mike Fitzpatrick. You could not get a better skipper than Fitzpatrick. Just knew how to command the side. Just knew how. If he pointed at you, you knew you had to go the next one. So it's outstanding side, and fully deserved those 3 out of the 4 premierships in 79, 81, and 82.
It would seem as though, Buzz, that you turned it on when Geelong was on the field, especially in that 1981 season, because there are a couple of memorable moments that you probably may remember. Tell us about that goal, the goal of the year out at Waverley.
I don't think there's a day that goes by that no one reminds me about it, or they say, I was there. I think I'm up to 75,000 at Princess Park for the mark, and I think I'm up to about 64,000 for the goal. Buzz, I saw you take that, and I saw you kick that. But look, that's fine, Pete. If you give people, entertainment, and that's really what I was all about. I loved entertaining. I loved, showing off, if you want to put it that way. But, you mentioned it before. You had to go when you had to go. They wouldn't have taken any prisoners, our blokes, and, especially someone like McClure or, Fitzpatrick, they'd be on you straight away. And when you had to go for the side. And that's exactly what it was. The mark, Pete, we'll go to the mark first. Well, it was one of those, rides that you get. Went around the back of the pack. I followed McClure around there.
And this is up in front of the Robert Heatley stand.
Right in front of the Robert Heatley stand, and I think the cross is still on the edge of the square there, Pete, where it was taken. I do go there every year and mark it,
You're like Greg Norman, they put a plaque down there.
I haven't thought of that one, but I will, Pete, thank you. The right leap come at the right time. Big Johnny Mossop sort of crouched and was just about ready to probably go for a leap, and as he sort of stood up, he sort of took me up with him, and the big Swan Mackay, about 12, 13 foot off the ground, he had his fingertips virtually on the ball, and I sort of just plucked it out of his hands and put it onto the shoulder. And of course, then I thought to myself, "Geez, I've got to fall here. I hope I don't go on the head or whatever." But come down pretty good. But just one of those rides that you get. That young Jeremy Howe from Collingwood does it virtually every second week, doesn't he? Fantastic to watch. I love watching him. And a bit disappointed too, Pete, that the big mark has gone out of the game a little bit, hasn't it, over the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, they don't kick to a contest anymore, do they?
No, I agree with you. A couple of weeks later was the second semi-final. Geelong kicked the first 3 goals, and we hadn't had a sniff. And the old coach sent the runner out and went to a couple of us and say, "Come on, we've just got to do something." Now our runner in those days, Pete, I didn't mince his words either. I must go back to a quick story for you. This was my first, as I say, the first game, and what happened with Hunter and myself. At the last game with Perth, 3,000 people there. Good on you, Buzz. Good on you, Kenny. Good luck, and for next year at Carlton. Anyway, I was the red hot favourite, Pete, to win the Sandover medal. I'd kicked 85 goals from centre half forward, and went to the Sandover medal. Polled 5 votes. Walked out to the room, kicked the chairs over, kicked tables over. Said, "I'm not going, this way." Then I was the red hot favourite for the Perth medal, of course, and polled 7 votes. So I got up on stage and said, "You don't really want me here. I'm going to Carlton." So went to Carlton, Park and rang. That story goes. Anyway, as I mentioned, shot my mouth off how high I could jump, etc., etc., etc. Well, as I said before, there was 3,000 people at that last game. There were 77,000 people at the game at Waverley. Richmond versus Carlton, one of the biggest games of the year. I walked out on wobbly legs, and I thought to myself, "Oh, what have I done here?" 20-minute mark, Pete. I hadn't touched the ball. And all of a sudden, I saw the little white bloke coming around the thing. It was the runner. And he said to me, "You big-headed so-and-so from Western Australia, you can't get a kick." Pete, I said to him, I can't breathe, I can't move, And he said he went back to Parkin, and Parkin said, "Tell him to sit down, squat down, take 3 deep breaths, stand up, have a look around the ground and take it all in." And it was the best advice I got, Pete. The rest of the game, I had 25 possessions, kicked 3 goals, took 11 marks, and we won by 10 goals. And that really changed my VFL career when David Parkin saw I was in deep trouble. So that was probably just another reason why I'd admire David Parkin so much, because he did that with a lot of players too, Pete. If anyone was in trouble, he wouldn't berate them. He did get that.
The jugular
going, correct. But that was sort of in a team type situation, and as you can probably gather, I absolutely admire the gentleman enormously. But
did Parko once say about you, Buzz? You were one of the best players that he ever coached when you decided that you wanted to play, or something along those lines?
Well, he may have said that, but I sort of. I sort of worked on the 1%ers too, Pete. I think he loved me doing that, the tackling, the shepherding, the blocking, that sort of thing. And I did that for the teammates too. And I think people may know, I had 17 effective tackles against Essendon one day. And that was the very famous game that Mike Fitzpatrick had the ball taken off him. And David, said to us in the rooms afterwards, we probably blew a game we should have won. Look at this bloke down here. He's had 17 tackles and kicked 3 or 4 goals, whatever I kicked, and just turned it on for us. And I don't think again that year, Pete, we lost a game because we went through and Essendon couldn't get near us. Interesting story, Essendon supporters. I played about 8 or 9 games against Essendon. Not once I was in a winning side against them.
Really?
And it's incredible. They beat us in the night grand final. They beat us in the 2 games every year. I think they even beat us in some scratch matches too, Pete. So, Essendon supporters, I never had a winning feeling against you, Mob. And Kevin Sheedy often says to me about that. He said, it's the only one I think, great player that hasn't had a win against us. And sort of reminds me all the time, old Sheeds.
Now, we didn't quite get to the end of the story about the goal. It was it Ian Nankervis?
Yes, it was. The ball came over the back of the pack. Big Johnny Blake was in the pack, and I think McClure was in the pack, went over the top of the pack, chased it back towards the boundary line, and Ian was going to kick it down the ground a half back flank and just probably hug the old boundary line. Pete, I dove from about 35, 40 yards and, and smothered it. All right, 3 yards, all right, okay.
Yes.
I think the mistress might have picked that up. Smothered the ball. It stayed about 2 inches from going out. So I thought, I'll pick this up and I'll run straight in and kick a goal here. But I didn't realise that the 3 Geelong players were coming at me. So I just thought I had a quick look and screwed it back over the shoulder, nearly hit the post. and just went through, and I thought, oh, geez, that's the goal of the year as well. So I had the double at the time, and, I thought, well, how good's this? In a couple of weeks' time, we can play off for a grand final. So, and I am, Pete, and you've probably got it in your notes there. I'm the only player in history to take the mark, to kick the goal, and be a part of a premiership in the 1 year.
I was going to mention that, and there's one other little thing that I wanted to mention about 81. You obviously had a very good year. So you would have been talked about with the Brownlow in 81.
Yep.
Now, when the Brownlow medal happened in 1981, I think you polled really well in the early going, didn't you? I think you got a few 3 votes early on.
I think I got about 4 threes, yeah.
You weren't in the room, were you?
I think I was up in the box with you at the Greyhounds at Melbourne Park.
At Olympic Park.
Olympic Park, sorry, yes, we were too.
Sitting in the broadcast box.
Well, you were saying, you better get to the function, Buzz. You better get to the function.
Well, that's exactly what I said, because they're all looking around saying, hang on, where is this bloke? And I knew exactly where you were.
That's a true story too, actually, listeners. And, Pete and I go way back, as we said before, and I used to love going to the Dogs, and, of course, in the latter days, it was the big Hawk man too. I tried to get him over to the Carlton, Pete, but he loves his Hawks.
Oh, yeah.
So, I went to Geelong with him and a couple of other places, and I think you and I ended up at Carlton a couple of times too, Pete, on the races and that sort of thing. So
we'll talk more about the end of your time at Carlton and the possible comeback when we come back on the other side of the break. But you just mentioned a name there, Robert Klomp. Were you playing in the famous game? It was out at Waverley in the pre-season competition, I think it was. Or it actually probably wasn't pre-season at that stage. It was during the season. They'd play on a Tuesday night. And Robert Klomp got the award for the best player on the ground.
Yeah.
He got the telly. And he had, 3 touches?
3 or 4 touches for the day. And
Louis gave him the telly.
I don't know how many punches or smothers or shepherds he had, Pete, but no, that's a true story again. And I think a lot of people remind him about that too.
I bet he's sick of it.
Lou, yeah.
We'll take a break, Buzz, and we'll come back on the other side of the break and talk about your time coming to an end at Carlton. And as I said, the possibility of coming back, but what thwarted you when you tried to do that. Peter Bousustow is my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funeral, celebrating lives. Plenty more to come after the break.
This is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
What a great pleasure it is to have the great Peter Bousustow as my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Flag in 81, Buzz, when you come over. Flag in 82. You must have thought, gee, this is a pretty easy game. Just collect premierships along the way.
Don't know about that, but you mentioned the Olympic Park and Carlton we went to and Sandown. What about the Moonee Valley on the Friday night, Pete? I used to get there a lot too.
Yes,
and,
the harness racing.
I used to have to get home by a certain time and take the phone call from David Park, and if I wasn't there, and of course, listeners, I don't know whether a lot of you remember this, but I did live with a gentleman called Leo Brooks. Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Brooks was the grandfather of Jason and Mark Moran.
So you would have got to meet some reasonably colourful characters, Buzz.
Well, yes, they all had pinstripes on and pinstripe suits, but Pete, they sort of treated us like celebrities. They were there. Alphonse was there, and, Jason wasn't very old in those. I think Jason was probably about 16. Mark was about 18 or 19. They probably weren't into it by then, but they knew that sort of, I'm not calling them a gang because they weren't a gang. They were just sort of people that sponsored. I think Alphonse was a Carltonian at one stage, Pete, which is a sponsor of the Carlton Football Club. And, we got never introduced to that. Jimmy and myself and Wayne and Sellers, we all, used to, just have a Bruce Jones, have a quiet drink. And there was nothing sort of involved in that. But I don't think that particular incidents or episodes happened about 10 years later. Was sort of, probably early to mid-90s, and that's how I was well gone by then. I was still in contact with Leo. And of course, Leo wouldn't say much, but the sort of infamy was certainly around at that time. But no, I was sort of never involved. I did meet Alan Williams, who was probably one of the biggest drug lords at the time, and of course the stories went from then on. People got into it, and that's how Carl Williams got into it too. And but it's probably enough of that, Pete. I don't know whether I'll get myself into trouble talking about it. But no trouble with Jason or Mark. They were just fantastic. They were in the rooms all the time. And of course, old Leo, what a fantastic store. Yeah. But he was for the Carlton Footy Club and knew Johnny Russell very well. And that's how we sort of got along very well with the race callers and broadcasters in those days, Pete. Because JR was probably the guru at the time, and you were coming through, and the Hawk and. Probably Brian was there, Brian Martin as well.
Martin
and
was there, yeah.
I think there was a couple of others too that we we got into it. And of course we met all the jockeys because Jimmy knew all the jockeys and Greg Hall and Wayne Trelaw and all those sort of great jockeys. And it was sort of again a family type thing that we all sort of helped each other and looked out for each other. And it was good to be around.
So life's pretty good. You're taking all these marks, you're kicking all these goals. You got 2 flags under your belt, but then injury strikes and it changed things.
Well, 83, I had a fairly reasonable season as well. Probably kicked 40-odd, 43 or something. But I had a very, very, very similar incident to the GAT incident a couple of weeks ago. I was playing on a half-back flanker called John Law from North Melbourne. And John was pulling me and grabbing the jumper and grabbing the thing. And I virtually turned around, Pete, and I hit him on the nose with a sort of a round arm, and of course, young Gat, of course, swung the hand, and unfortunately he connected, and that was the result. We know the result. I got reported for it, and the umpire came up to me at quarter time and said, "Player 4, I've reported you for hitting player 13 for North Melbourne," and went to the tribunal, Pete. I thought the evidence went very well in my favour. John come in and said, "Look, yes, he did hit me, but I wasn't affected. I didn't go off the ground. I wasn't cut. No worries." Kept on, playing on him, and the umpire come in, Pete, and said, "Player 4 struck player 13," and so much so I thought it was a king hit. I thought I'm in big trouble here, So anyway, he said where it was. It was across the middle of the ground. It was in the goal square, and I said to my advocate, I said, he hasn't seen it. He's probably just guessed. Player 4, we suspend you for 4 games for the rest of the season. So, Pete, that virtually was round 20, and it was only round 21 to go, plus the finals. We played Essendon the next week, lost. Then we played Essendon the week after and lost the 83 first semi-final. And, of course, that was the end of my VFL career.
So did you have a premonition that once you got that 4-week suspension that was going to be the end of it?
Yeah, I did, because I'd had already signed with Perth for because I was preempting father getting worse with his leukemia. We didn't know much about it in those times. He had the benign, Pete, so it wasn't a lethal killer one, but we just didn't know anything about it. So I said to Dad, "Look, I'll come back for a year or two, take the pressure off you, and we'll go from there." Halfway through the season, Pete, I was, playing really good footy. Perth weren't going to make the finals. Carlton come over, knocked on the door. "Do you want to come back?" I said, "If you can make it happen, I'll certainly want to come back." Anyway, I played a state game, and as I said, I was playing pretty well with Perth, and played a state game. Played in the state game. I was to be cleared on the Saturday night to play with Carlton on the Monday, which was the Queen's birthday long weekend, Pete. I think we were playing Footscray at the time. Unfortunately, one of the Perth directors got in the paper and called me a traitor. And that went all over Australia. Bousustow traitor, leaving Perth in the lurch, all this sort of thing. I got to Adelaide, there was a heap of cameramen and newspapermen and trying to get the story. So I rang Carlton. I said, "What's going on? "Oh, they haven't agreed to the clearance. It's all over a certain amount. But don't worry, we'll fix it." I said, "Okay." Anyway, it didn't happen. Played pretty well in the state game, Pete. We won the game by a point. Played with virtually the Eagles side of the next couple of years. David Hart and Malaxis and Robbie Wiley, I think, was in the side as well. Kempy, I think, was in it. There was a couple of others, so it was a really good side. And we played against Kernahan and Bradley and Motley, of course, had the famous number 2 that his career was cut short with that car crash. And great, McIntosh and, many great who played for the and McGuinness was there, and many great players that played with the Adelaide Crows. Anyway, that didn't happen. Went back to Perth and played a couple of more games at Perth. Got picked in a state side on just before the 30th of June. In those days, Pete, the 30th of June, you could be cleared either to Melbourne or back to Perth or Vicky Burkett. So I played a state game, and unfortunately, they couldn't come to terms, and so that was it. About 4 weeks later, I still played pretty well. I was kicking, multiples of goals. One game I kicked 8 goals against Subiaco. We were in front virtually all day. Last kick of the day, Subiaco got up and beat us. I'm walking off the ground, and a couple of the Perth supporters are calling me a traitor, and you should be whacked and all this sort of thing. And I got to the top of the stairs, and I said to one of the stalwarts said, "Don't worry, Buzz, we'll win next week." And I sort of said, stuff next week. And I put my hand through a plate glass window, and there it is there. And I put it through, and
I can see the scar now.
Done about three nerves and 4 tendons and 5 muscles all in that ring. Of course, that was the end of the year for that year.
Gee, it must have bled a bit though.
Yeah, well, I'd lost 5 litres of the 8 litre blood. Oof. So,
were you in danger of being seriously?
The doctors actually said to me, "You're very, very close to not to lose your hand," but because you were so calm, Pete, I just thought I'd cut myself. I said to the doc, "Doc, I'll just slash my wrist, just stitch it up, and I'll be okay." He said, "No, it wasn't. There was clamps everywhere. He was trying to clamp off the separate arteries and all that sort of thing." And of course, when you see someone cut their wrists, and it bleeds pretty profusely. So, but apparently the doctor said if he had lost any more. And he said, often told me, "I did save your life. I think I did save your life." So, and that was unfortunately the end of that season. 85, I had a very, very good start to the season. I polled, I think, 9 votes in the first 5 or 6 waffle games, and I had one more year of the contract to go. And I rolled my ankle on a practice session on a Sunday. And Mel Brown was the coach, Pete, and he come back from Victoria and was coaching the Perth side at the time. Couldn't get it right in 85. Okay, end of 85, I was out of contract. I went back to Melbourne. I said to him, "Look, I want to come back. I think the ankle's right." Trained for 2 months before from the last game to virtually the last training session. Stood in a hole in Park Royal Ovals there, and done the ankle again, and that was virtually the end of it. I took nearly 2 years to try and get it right. Carlton did everything in their power to try and get me right. They sent me to Sydney for specialist, Pete, back to Melbourne, back to Perth to try and get this ankle right. They can't do a reconstruction like they can do now, but this was sort of 30 years ago. So, and in the end they were saying to us, "Buzz, let Carlton people remember you, how you were. We wouldn't like you to come back now and be, half the player or quarter the player that you were, and, maybe tarnish the reputation." Yeah.
Did you feel as though your career had been snatched away from you? Were you dirty at the time?
Yeah, I was, and I regret it really now. I do. I regret it now. My wife was, she said, "Look, go back. You love playing over there. The fans love you over there. You give it to them." And Peter, very, very good story. I think you'll be happy, and the listeners will be happy. My daughter contacted cervical cancer, 4 of the 5 stages of cervical cancer, and she was lined with polyps and that sort of thing. And ladies will probably know what I'm talking about there. And I had that many people ring me and offer support and offer, monetary or charity. And I said to them, "Look, I'm not after that. If you want a signed jumper of me or a photo or something like that, you can possibly, I'll do that for you." Now, Pete, I wasn't going to take a risk if she had to have a quick operation to do it. So it was fantastic that the people, and they were saying to me, "Pete, you gave us so much great pleasure in watching you play. Why can't we do something for you?" So, it was a terrific thing. I've had a couple of scallywags in my life as well, Pete, but I won't go into those. They're too long a story. But there's some people out there that are very, very good-natured.
Well, we might take our final break, and I'll touch on that and just how you're going at the moment, how the body is post-footy with all of those things that happened during your football career, and we'll come back and wrap it up with Peter Bousustow on the other side of the break. Our final segment coming on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
This is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
Time is on the wing. I wish we had more of it with Peter Bousustow on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Buzz, you spoke about the fact that you've been in the company of some scallywags over the years. Things have been tough a couple of times financially for you.
Yeah. I've had some, shysters, I suppose, or fraudsters. Probably the one big one is in Perth. decided to get into a very big business joint venture with a developer in Western Australia, some 400 lots. And it was about 10 years ago, Pete, so it was just when our property market was ready to boom.
Yeah.
We bought quite a bit of land out where I actually lived in Canning Vale. It's south of Perth, about 20 kilometres from Perth, and a very, very, very good area. And we were probably a quarter of the way in there. We had a third of the joint venture. And the bloke decided to scratch us off the joint venture, and we've been in jail. We've been in court with him ever since for 10 years. So still trying to get some money out of the bloke. But no, you've just got to keep going. As I mentioned before earlier, got to get around now. The bank come after me a couple of times, and I think I did mention to you off air that I had both hips done. I've had those reinvented, I suppose is one of the words. But and then I was on me, back for quite a while trying to get over them, and the bank wouldn't wait for interest or anything like that, and there was no money coming in, so we lost a house. My wife, she's stuck with me for absolute fat for 10 years since that's happened. It was no fault of hers, and she's had to go through absolute living hell. But you get back on the horse, so to speak, and try and do these things. And as I mentioned before, we do go around with Jacko and Jezza and David Rees-Jones and Diesel Williams, Sticks Kernahan. I do a lot with Steve. The old saying there is, Buzz, who's the greatest number 4 at Carlton? I said, well, if Steve Kernahan's in the room, he is, but if he's not, I am. And if he's in the room and I'm in the room, I go back to number 4, Pete, because he's 1, 2 and 3. But great man, Steve Kernahan, and love him to death, and just always, if I've got something for him to sign, a number 4 to sign, and someone wants a charity or a fundraiser or something like that, and I say, yep, we love you and Sticks, he'll sign it for me, and without any question. Same with Alex Jesselenko. They're such fantastic people that support the lesser lights. Pete, I think I mentioned to you off air, we've just had a couple of weeks ago a miner that went off one of our big mines up at Paradoo, and absolute mad Carlton supporter. I was only up there 4 weeks ago, as I mentioned, Pete. He bought a couple of the marks off me, and he said, Buzz, I'd love to come to one of your shows and all that sort of thing when you come back up. And someone rang me a couple of Fridays ago and said, oh, Buzz, it's one of those people that you met at the football club, when you did the talk there, and he drove off the cliff fully loaded and never had a chance. And all his wife wants is a signed signature of Alex Jesselenko and myself, and I've got one here. I think I've showed you, and it brings a bit of the tear to the eye, Pete, because footballers have got they've got a duty, to so a lot of people support you. And a lot of people again you, I suppose, is the point. But, the people that are with you, they support you all the way through. And I can only be too happy to sign that for the got a two-week-old baby as well, Pete, which makes it even worse, So, but, we find many of those. And as I mentioned, a lot of those Carlton guys are really, really great when you want help. And as I mentioned with my daughter, Chris Judd sent a jumper over to me, signed the jumper. And, it was just a matter of, Buzz, you've done a lot for the club, why can't we help you? So it's great, yeah.
It puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
And I guess there are times where you must sit back and think, I've had a very privileged position to be as well known as I am as a footballer, but when you hear of stories like that, you realise just how much a part of people's lives you become over the years.
I think you're right. It's a very good point. Not only that sort of accident, Pete, but the cancers and other things, and people don't deserve that. Of course, they don't deserve it. I've even done. For dreaded enemies, on the footy field, they ring me up and my young son has got something and would you do something? Of course I will. So you just think that, you've got to support people and you've got to support the people that, have supported you. They may go back to their father, and I get a lot of that, oh, you're my father's number one player, or you're my father's number one, idol, and that sort of thing, which is great. I come across the plane a couple of weeks ago and I played against a young fellow who was sitting next to his father, and he knew Tony Beers. who played for Collingwood, who passed away a couple of months ago. Very, very sad occasion as well. And we all grieve, Pete. We all grieve because we are a family. And I've spoken to Rex Hunt and many other great football names, and even yourself now, that we're all of a family, and if we can help each other in any way, I think it's our duty to. And anyone out there that needs any help from me, if they want me to sign anything, and Pete, I do get a lot of cards being sent to me, and the little the marks of the year and all that sort of thing. I'm only too happy to sign them and send them back for people.
It's been a long time since we've caught up, Buzz, but it's been very enjoyable for the last hour or so. I wish we had about 4 hours. We're probably going to need 3 hours after this interview just to catch up on some of the stories. But
no cutting, Jono, no cutting. Just go straight through.
Nobody who ever saw you play in that era will ever forget the impact that you had in those 60-odd games in the VFL. We had some good times. I still think back to that night, that Brownlow night of 1981. And who knows, we might catch up in a commentary box somewhere in the next. I
was nearly out the door, Pete, if you remember. You were shoving me out the door. You said, you get another 3 votes here and you've got to go. Yeah, but I think I was in my moccasins last night.
Probably, but the only thing was you had a good thing in the 5th, so you weren't going anywhere. Buzz, you're a champ. Good to see you, mate.
Thanks very much, Pete. Absolute pleasure, and really great to see you.
Good on you, mate. Peter Bousustow joining us on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funeral, celebrating lives, and we'll be back with another edition of the program right here next week. Hope you can join us then.